Russia, Nizhny Tagil, early 2000s. Imagine borscht, a cutlet with mashed potatoes in a factory cafeteria. In the evening, trams, buses, cold inside, young people rush to the club just to forget a little about the heaviness of the city, but something is changing. At first there were quiet rumors. A girl was found outside the city, then another and another. All young women, all after taking a taxi ride, all died from asphyxiation. Bodies by the roadside, clothes neatly folded in piles. And now mothers are warning their daughters, don't get into a taxi with strangers. The newspapers report another body found on the outskirts. The police are looking for a connection between the deaths of the women. At first no one really believed it, but a woman went missing. It happens, you know. Yeah, maybe she didn't even go missing at all. But then another one, and that was already strange. And when people started saying that both of them had called a taxi before they disappeared, troubling rumors began to spread around the city. People started whispering that some maniac was hunting girls who took taxis. Some said that the bodies were found outside the city, near the road. Others claimed that the victims always got into the same car. A dark green Lada 110. People started walking each other to their apartment entrances, and in the evenings the streets became kind of empty. People tried not to linger and not to take unnecessary risks. The maniac was given a name, the Tagil Strangler. And every time someone called a taxi, the thought would involuntarily pop up, what if? And it all started in 2002 with the disappearance of Galina Gambarova. She was 35 at the time. She lived in Nizhny Tagil, worked as an accountant at a small construction company, and was raising her son, Timur. On September 21, Galina was getting ready to run some errands as usual. She planned to visit a friend and then go to the store for groceries. Everything happened routinely. The woman called a local taxi, went outside, got into the car, and wasn't seen again until her body was found. She was found only a week later, 100 meters from the road leading from the city center to the village of Verkhnaya Cheremshanka. The place was secluded with a strip of forest nearby, sparse streetlights, and almost no one around in the evenings. The search went on all those days. Her relatives called hospitals and police stations, combed the streets, and put up flyers. For a week, her loved ones had no idea where she was or what happened. The news of her being found was a real shock for her family. Galina left behind a son, Timur. At that time, he had just turned 12. The boy studied at school number 17 and did rock climbing at the school affiliated with NTMK. The coaches noted his talent. Timur showed excellent results at city competitions and had great potential. People around him said that he could become a champion. He had excellent coordination, endurance, and the will to win. However, after receiving the news of his mother's death, Timur began to change. At first, he withdrew into himself, stopped going to training, and then stopped communicating with his friends. His behavior became increasingly strange. He could sit by the window for hours without responding to anyone, or suddenly get up and leave without any explanation. Over time, the situation got worse. The doctors diagnosed a mental disorder, and the boy was granted disability status. He never managed to cope with the trauma, with the loss of his mother, and with the realization of how exactly it happened. The details spread through the city, and Timur found out that his mother was killed after a taxi ride. For the family, the tragedy was a double blow. First, they lost Galina, and then it was as if they lost Timur too. The cheerful boy he once was seemed to disappear. The grandmother, who took on the care of her grandson, remembered. He used to laugh, joke, and dream about competitions, but after that day, it was as if the light inside him was turned off. At that moment, few people suspected that what had happened could be the beginning of a series of terrible events. The incident was seen as a separate tragedy, which people spoke about with sympathy. The local newspapers wrote a couple of short articles without details. The police opened a case but quickly let it slide, not seeing any connection with other incidents. Only later, when reports of new disappearances began to appear, did people remember Galina's story. But that was later, and in 2002 no one could have imagined what horrors awaited the city in the future. After the incident with Galina, everything seemed to quiet down. The years went by, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, and there was no news about women disappearing. Everything was forgotten. In the evenings, the streets were lively. Young people walked around until late. Children played in the parks. Mothers with strollers calmly strolled along the alleys. Grandmothers sat on benches and chatted as before, discussing the weather, their grandchildren, prices in the stores, and passers-by. But in 2007, the killings resumed. The first that year was Victoria Agafonova. She was 27 years old and worked as an accountant at a small company. The evening of March 22 was chilly and windy, but Victoria wasn't thinking about anything bad. She was just getting ready to go home after work. She called her friend, said she was already leaving, then ordered a taxi through the dispatcher. She left the office, got into the car, and that was it. No one ever saw her alive again. The next morning, her family was already calling hospitals and police stations. Victoria's husband, Andrei, immediately got all their friends involved. They combed the streets, questioned passers-by near the office, and checked the entrances of nearby buildings. Friends put up posters with Victoria's photo and posted messages online. For a whole day, the family lived in hope. Maybe she just got held up somewhere, lost her phone, or ended up in the hospital without any documents. But on the morning of March 23rd, there was a call from the police. Victoria's body was found 30 meters from the road, near a billboard at the 135th kilometer of the Surovsky highway. When the relatives arrived for identification, it turned out that everything happened just like in 2002. The woman disappeared after a taxi ride. Her body was found on the roadside and her clothes were neatly folded nearby. Less than a week had passed when another tragedy occurred. Marina Zhuravlyova, 32 years old, mother of 2 children. That day, she went to the market as she did every week to buy groceries and look for something for the holiday. She left in the morning and promised to be back by lunchtime, but by evening she still hadn't returned. Her family became worried right away. Marina never stayed out without letting anyone know. She always called if something changed. For 3 days, her family lived as if in a fog. They put up flyers all over the neighborhood, asked volunteers for help, and waited by the phone. On the 3rd day, there was a call from the police. Marina was found at the 133rd kilometer of the Surovsky highway, in the same area where Victoria was found. The circumstances were just as gruesome as with the previous victim. The city started whispering that the maniac had returned. Then other names started to appear. Nadezhda Cherepanova, a woman around 40 years old with no relatives in the city. She worked on the street and few people knew her. When she disappeared, almost no one went looking for her. The crime had the same signature. Another victim was Oksana Sesterova, a young mother of 5-year-old Vaika. On that fateful day, Oksana left her friend's place and called a taxi to go to her grandparents' house. They lived outside the city. No one ever saw her alive again. 30 days of searching, and then terrible news struck the family of Oksana Sesterova. Her body was discovered on October 30th at the 4th kilometer of the Nizhny Tagil, Cherny Istoknik Road. The body was naked. Oksana was raising her daughter Vaika, a 5-year-old blonde little girl. Several years ago, their family went through a terrible loss. Oksana's husband died in prison. Now fate was preparing a new, even more cruel blow. 3 days after Oksana's body was found, her mother Lyudmila's heart couldn't bear the grief. The woman died of a heart attack. The search for those responsible began. Investigators descended on Sesterova's house and started bombarding the relatives with questions. The whole family, including the little daughter, saw the photos of naked Oksana, and the girl's psyche was shattered. Soon she was assigned Category 2 psychiatric disability status, and her grandparents, swallowing their tears, were forced to send their granddaughter to a special needs kindergarten. Neighbors said that the girl hardly spoke and spent all her time drawing her mother, always in a white dress, always smiling. The last victim that terrible year was Oksana Chizhova. She disappeared in October, got into a car, and vanished. Her body was found later, and it seemed like the grim conclusion to the terrifying chain of events in 2007. Oksana was young, cheerful, worked at a cafe, and dreamed of starting her own business. That evening, she was coming back from her friend's place. She was in a good mood, called her mom, and said she was already on her way home. She didn't answer any more calls after that. People followed the news, watched the reports, and with horror realized that what everyone thought was over was actually just beginning. Fear once again enveloped the city. Women became more cautious, arranged to be met, asked friends to accompany them, and avoided walking alone late at night. Everyone immediately noticed that the criminal had a clear pattern, as if he was acting according to a plan. But at the same time, no one could predict what he would choose next, but the pattern always repeated. At first, he would somehow deceive the woman, either pretending to be an ordinary taxi driver or saying he would take her where she needed to go, and then suddenly change the route. And just like that, she was no longer on her way home. And it turns out she's somewhere on the outskirts of the city, in a remote place where there's no one around and no one will hear her cries for help. After that, everything happened the same way. Sexual assault, death by asphyxiation. The most horrifying thing was finding out how he left the bodies, always by some road on the roadside, as if he was deliberately showing, "Here she is, look." At the same time, the bodies were naked and the clothes were neatly folded nearby, sometimes even smoothed out, as if he did it on purpose, with some kind of perverse neatness. And he didn't take the condoms with him either, leaving them not far from the body. Later, his biological traces were found there. This was one of the main pieces of evidence. Gradually, the police finally noticed the connection between the cases. At first, each investigation was conducted separately, but there were just too many cases, and even the investigators realized that most likely there was one perpetrator. They paid attention to the locations where the bodies were found and their positions, and then discovered that all the victims had disappeared after taking taxi rides. The dispatches confirmed that the women ordered a car, went out to it, and then disappeared. They compared the circumstances. The victims were between 25 and 35 years old, and they most often disappeared in the evening or at night. Death was always caused by asphyxiation. They reviewed old cases and remembered Galina Gambarova, who disappeared in 2002. Her body was also found by the roadside with her clothes lying nearby. Previously, this was considered a separate incident, but now it's clear the signature is the same. The investigators laid out photographs of the crime scenes, maps with markings, and interrogation reports, searching for patterns. It became clear this was a series. The cases were combined, and a special task force was created. The investigators meticulously reconstructed the victims' last hours, called their relatives, friends, and colleagues, and determined their routes and taxi pickup points. They went to taxi companies, requested order logs, recordings of conversations with dispatchers, and lists of drivers who were working on the days of the disappearances. The dispatchers were questioned multiple times and asked to recall calls assigned to specific drivers, as well as cases when the wrong car arrived. They remembered. Sometimes drivers would approach women at bus stops and offer them a ride. This was against the rules. They checked the drivers' alibis and compared their routes. There were no leads for a long time, too many taxi drivers and too many routes. The breakthrough happened thanks to the story of Yelena Klimina. She called a taxi in the evening, went outside and got into a dark green Lada 110. The driver, a middle-aged man, suggested not going home but to another place. He said unpleasant things and slowed down the car. Yelena demanded to stop, jumped out and ran away. On her way home, she noticed that the same car was following her. She called the traffic police. The officers started a chase and stopped the car. The driver tried to offer a bribe, but the officer filed a report. A couple of days later, Yelena saw this car near her house again, remembered the license plate number, and reported it to the police. The type of car matched the one that had been seen near the places where the bodies were found. The driver's behavior was suspicious: harassment, an attempt to take the passenger away, a chase, and a bribe. His repeated appearance at Elena's house looked like surveillance. Investigators began checking the owners and drivers of dark green Lada 110s, cross-referencing data with taxi companies, and looking for overlaps with the routes of missing women. The police requested data from all taxi companies again. There were many drivers, so they narrowed the pool. Priority was given to those who had already had problems with the law. They went through the archives, looked for criminal records, administrative violations, and passenger complaints. They filtered out those who had recently worked or lived far from the crime scenes. They checked the others more thoroughly, interviewed colleagues, studied routes, and checked alibis. And then they matched the car number from Elena Klemina's testimony with the databases, a dark green Vaz 2110 license plate X625 owner Roman Fetisov. The investigators requested his personal file. It turned out that he used to serve in the police in the Tagil district of Nizhny Tagil, but was dismissed for disciplinary violations. Colleagues noted his untidiness and aggression towards women. Then he got a job at Bistro Taxi right around the time of the first disappearances. Fetisov fit the psychological profile, withdrawn, with communication problems, and without a stable family. He also went to Chechnya. After his first experience taking a life, he came back even more withdrawn and irritable. Fetisov was put under surveillance, his routes were tracked, and his acquaintances were questioned. Every fact, passenger complaint, strange behavior, and coincidence in timing with the disappearances strengthened the theory. Roman Fetisov was born and raised in Nizhny Tagil in the area near NTMK. He finished school, he served in the army. In 2000 he got a job at the Tagil District Police Department in Tagil, but things didn't work out there. He was disorganized, untidy, rude to colleagues and superiors, showed dislike toward women, and sometimes smoked weed. In 2005 he was dismissed from the department. Almost immediately he got a job as a driver at Bistro Taxi. The first victim, Galina Gambarova, disappeared in 2002 near the Tagilstroevskoye cafe in an area Fetisov knew well, since at that time he was still on the police force. Later, his fellow police officers didn't think much of him, and his colleagues from the taxi also noted his strange behavior. He could refuse a ride if the passenger was a woman, would drive around the city for a long time, rarely took dispatch calls, and more often picked up passengers on the streets, especially in the evening. Fetisov was arrested almost by accident. In July 2008, he caused a disturbance in a parking lot near the market and was taken to the police station. In the lineup, Elena Klimina pointed him out as that very taxi driver. During the interrogations, they reminded him about the car, the complaints, his strange behavior, and the coincidences in places and times. At first, he denied everything, but under the pressure of the facts, he confessed on July 16, 2008. He admitted his involvement in the killings. Galina Gambarova, Nadezhda Cherepanova, Victoria Agafonova, Marina Zhuravleva, Oksana Sesterova, and Oksana Chizhova. He described the details and named the burial sites. Fetisov gave the impression of someone who was deeply socially alienated. Such people often live with the feeling that the world around them is unfair to them. They have trouble fitting into groups and take criticism hard, and gradually begin to see other people not as allies, but as a source of irritation and threat. Fetisov seems like someone carrying pent-up resentment and chronic dissatisfaction with life. The peculiarity of such people is that they rarely look dangerous. More often they just look dissatisfied, sullen, unpleasant, or strange. But inside, a belief gradually forms that others are to blame for everything. If this process goes too far, a person starts to justify their own cruelty by claiming that the world supposedly forced them to become this way. As in, we're not like this, life made us this way. Another characteristic trait is emotional impoverishment. Such people often don't know how to build deep relationships and perceive intimacy as something inaccessible to them. Because of this, they grow increasingly envious of those who seem more successful, beautiful, attractive, or happy. And if Fetisov was indeed involved in the crimes, and we'll talk about that later, then the most likely psychological basis could have been a mix of chronic bitterness, a sense of personal inferiority, and accumulated hostility towards others. But even if he is not guilty, many of the described traits still explain why he turned out to be such a convincing suspect in the eyes of the investigation and society. But a psychological profile is not proof of guilt, and from here on, the strangest part of this case begins. By the way, I talked about how to recognize a chronically resentful person before they start causing problems in my Telegram channel. The link is below the video. So the search of Fetisov's apartment was conducted a month after his arrest and with violations. In a suitcase on the balcony they found the victim's jewelry, Oksana Chijova's ruby earrings, Galina Gambarova's chain with a heart-shaped pendant, Nadezhda Cherepanova's turquoise ring, and Marina Zhuravlyova's bracelet. Fetisov's mother fainted when she saw the items. Agafonova's sister burst into tears when she recognized the chain that had been given as a gift. They organized investigative reenactments. Fetisov was taken to the crime scene and asked to reenact the events. But he got confused in his testimony, mixed up places, the 135th kilometer of the Serovsky Tract and the Pichtovye Mountains, names, calling Marina Zhuravlyova Nadezhda, Oksana Sesterova Victoria, and pointed out the wrong roads. Mistakes in the investigation also came to light. Key evidence was lost, condoms with seminal fluid near Gambarova's body, and the biological material under Chijova's fingernails was not sent for examination in time. The victim's jewelry was kept without proper records. Fetisov's car was given to relatives before it was examined, and the victim's phones were not found. A catastrophic conflict arose between the operatives, Pirin, Zhiganov, and the investigators. Meteleyev, Mitilev, Sosetkov, Bajev, the former accused the latter of negligence. Due to the lack of irrefutable evidence and procedural violations, the court refused to extend Fetisov's detention. Fetisov, however, refused to testify, citing Article 51 of the Russian Constitution, and stated that he was forced to confess under pressure. On July 16, 2009, Roman Fetisov was released. The city was gripped by anxiety. More precisely, the real criminal is free in any case, whether it's Fetisov or not. The victim's relatives wrote letters to the prosecutor's office demanding an investigation, but it became clear the chain of evidence was broken, time was lost, and the truth might remain undisclosed. Later, when Fetisov was released, the victim's relatives could not come to terms with his release. They felt that justice had not been served, and the real criminal was still at large. People started to come together, meeting in the evenings in the stairwells, discussing what to do next. Soon, they organized an initiative group, wrote collective letters, and started sending them to all the authorities. They wrote to the Prosecutor General's office, the Deputy Prosecutor General, the Prosecutor General, the Prime Minister, and the President. In the letters, they demanded an investigation into why the case fell apart, who was responsible for the loss of evidence, and why the person they believed was a serial killer was released. The letters were overflowing with emotion. Mothers wrote about their deceased daughters, husbands about their wives, and children about their mothers. The victims' relatives recalled how they hoped for justice, but now everything has collapsed. They gathered signatures in support of the letters. Hundreds of people across the city supported the demand to conduct a new investigation and punish those who made mistakes. Soon, amid public outcry, a criminal case was opened against the officers Pirin and Azhiganov. The convicted officers, who today received suspended sentences, did not hide their dissatisfaction with the verdict. One of them, former senior officer Sergei Azhiganov.
The officers convicted today with suspended sentences showed clear dissatisfaction with the verdict. One former senior operative, the ID is in Kali's custody. He remains confident. The victim is considered dangerous. They got caught.
We got caught. We will file cassation appeals because all of this is illegal, and it was known from the beginning that the case and the whole process are fabricated. Fetisov is behind it.
He was tortured and forced to give false testimony under pressure, kept awake for hours, threatened, and psychologically pressured. The newspapers sparked outrage. Some believed Fetisov and thought that the officers really crossed the line, while others suspected that he was just trying to get out of it and avoid responsibility. There were heated debates in the city. The trial of Pirin and Azhiganov was held behind closed doors in 2011. People were anxious, waiting for a fair decision. The verdict turned out to be controversial. Azhiganov received a suspended sentence, while Pirin got 4.5 years in prison. In addition, the court ordered Fetisov to be paid financial compensation in the amount of 250,000 rubles for emotional harm, and let me remind you, the dollar was 30 rubles at that time. All this caused a new wave of outrage among the victims' relatives. It turns out the criminal got the money, and they were left with nothing. Where is the justice? Pyrin was serving his sentence in a penal colony, but he didn't last long there. After a year and a half, he died of a heart attack. Doctors stated that he had heart problems even before his arrest, and the stress and harsh conditions in prison only made things worse. His death sparked new rumors and speculation. Some said it wasn't an accident, while others believed that fate itself had punished him. And the questions remained unanswered. Who was really the maniac? Why did the investigation make so many mistakes? Though unfortunately, that particular question doesn't really need to be asked. But could Fetisov really have been innocent? That's a very interesting question. The relatives of the victims, as well as everyone else, never received final answers to all the questions. Roman Fetisov seemed to disappear after the trial. He avoided publicity, didn't appear in places where he could be recognized, and hardly left his house unless it was absolutely necessary. Neighbors said he became even more withdrawn, rarely spoke to anyone, and if he met someone on the street, he would look away and walk faster. Almost nothing is known about his later life. Either he left Nizhny Tagil or he just went into hiding, trying not to attract attention. Was Fetisov really the Tagil strangler? The question remains unanswered to this day. What do you think? Was Fetisov guilty but managed to get away because of investigative mistakes? Or was he falsely accused and the real criminal was someone else entirely? One way or another, that pattern of crimes stopped. And here's another bonus case. It's unlikely you've heard about it. Kostroma, January 4th, 2022. A festive New Year atmosphere, full of wonder. Near the Children's Center, located in the building of the former Rossiya cinema, there's a big concert and a beautiful Christmas tree. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the event ends. The kids and parents leave. Veronika Nikolaeva's mom takes her to her workplace in the center's building and asks her to wait, but the girl is bored. She wants to go outside and admire the Christmas tree. Now her mom is already starting to get dressed and lets the girl go to the Christmas tree by herself. She promises to come out to her in a couple of minutes. Outside, 2 drunk men dressed in strange clothes run up to the girl, grab her and carry her away. All of this is witnessed by passers-by. Later, during police questioning, witnesses were able to describe the appearance of the kidnappers. They remembered that the men were carrying a little girl. Everything happened in a flash. That's why, at first, the girl didn't scream or call for help. She was scared, frozen, and in shock. Soon, the girl regained her voice and started screaming, "I want to go home! I want to go home!" The kidnappers replied, "We're going home, we're going home." Maybe that's why the witnesses didn't pay attention and didn't stop the men to ask what their relationship was to the child. Seeing this scene, they thought the girl was just being fussy, and the relatives, maybe her father and older brother, were carrying her home. Passers-by didn't pay attention to how much the men were rushing or how nervous they were. And the girl didn't look like a child from a troubled family at all, the kind of family she'd be from if those two had really been her relatives. When the girl's mother went outside and didn't see her anywhere, she rushed to search the nearby alleys. She checked if Veronika had run home alone. The house was very close by. Not finding the child, the woman called the police, then asked for help from the Liza Alert search team. Meanwhile, the 2 kidnappers were dragging the girl through deserted back alleys. The accomplices decided that it would be safer to take a big detour rather than go straight across open ground where they could be easily seen. The child screamed and tried to break free. Hoping to avoid being caught on street cameras, the criminals turned away from them and pressed the girl against the wall. People were already frantically searching for Veronika. These were the largest searches in Kostroma ever. About 1,000 volunteer searchers were working at the abduction site, including both trained specialists and ordinary concerned citizens. Those who managed to register to participate in the search and those who didn't. Closed areas, including apartments in nearby buildings, were searched by the police. Searchers from the volunteer squad later said that it was the first time they had seen so many police officers in one place. The criminals were caught on camera when they were kidnapping the girl and later at some distance away. There were two of them. The first criminal was older, wearing a sheepskin coat and wearing glasses. The second one, much younger, was wearing a down jacket. Security cameras on one of the houses away from the children's center made it possible to figure out roughly where Veronica was taken. But from that point there were many possible routes, toward the railroad, the garages, or the large area of private homes. Hundreds of searchers, not only from Kostroma but also from neighboring cities, combed every inch. As it would later become known, the girl was brought into the dormitory where she was killed around 5 in the evening. The building was very close, just across the road. At that moment, the girl was already unconscious and couldn't stand on her feet. On the footage from the dormitory corridor cameras, you can see that she is being carried and sometimes placed on her feet, leaning her against the wall. Veronica may have already been dead then, as the neighbors heard no screams. Very few people paid any attention to the strange pair of new tenants at all. Those who live in a dormitory already have to interact with each other very often, so if the neighbors are neat and live quietly, no one interferes in their affairs. The two newcomers were exactly those kinds of quiet, tidy people. The men rented a room. About a month ago, they introduced themselves as father and son. There was nothing to reproach them for. In the shared kitchen, they always left everything perfectly tidy after themselves. Not once did anyone see them leave a single dirty plate. The men were not noisy and did not bring crowds of guests, although their manners and voices were slightly effeminate. And the neighbors saw that the older man sometimes hugged the younger one in a way that was not at all fatherly. Sometimes the men would fool around in the elevator under the surveillance cameras. They made it get stuck, turned on music and danced around foolishly. In addition, the older man sometimes introduced himself with 2 different names. He also said that he had served in law enforcement and was even planning to return. On social media, he posted photos of himself in camouflage and a striped military undershirt. In reality, he was just putting on a show. The search for Veronica Nikolaeva continued until late in the evening. At 22:30, the volunteer searchers Stavyov and Ilya Abramov were driving around, checking the streets and asking passers-by. After reaching Chionaya Rechka, they were about to turn back. Other searchers had already been there before them. People on the street said they hadn't seen anything. Suddenly, 2 people walked past their car. The guys jumped up. It looked like they were wearing the same clothes and had the same build. The older one had the same glasses. The volunteers jumped out of the car and stopped the suspicious pedestrians. They briefly explained the situation. A girl is missing. We're questioning people. The guys asked where the 2 were going. To the square to get some grilled chicken. Something feels off, thought one volunteer. Why go so far for chicken when you can buy the exact same one nearby for much cheaper? Come with us to the station. It's not far from here. The police will make sure you're not guilty and let you go. The men refused. This seemed doubly suspicious to the volunteers. One of the guys took out his phone to call the police. The older of the men, the one in the sheepskin coat and glasses, took out a pack of cigarettes at that moment and nervously lit one. That's all there was to it. They didn't show any aggression, didn't try to run away or claim they were innocent. Then the volunteers saw a patrol Niva driving straight toward them. The guys waved to the police, signaling them to come over here. The patrol stopped and the criminals were apprehended. As it turned out, during the interrogation, at the time of their arrest, they were heading to the Chornaya River to find a place to dispose of the lifeless, bloodied body of their small victim. The maniacs hoped to cover their tracks. After 40 minutes of interrogation, the investigators already knew where and what to look for. In a dormitory room at 16 Volgeskaya Street, the mutilated body of little Veronica Nikolaeva was lying in a large black sports bag. Multiple stab wounds, ruptured internal organs, abuse. At 11:19 p.m. the search was declared over. Volunteers called hopefully and asked why the search was stopped, and in response they clearly heard NP, which means found deceased. No one could come to terms with such an outcome. Even the seasoned and experienced volunteers of the team, who had been searching for people for many years, couldn't believe what they heard. When you can't help an adult who got lost in the forest on their own, it's still possible to accept it with some composure, but here, it's a child. The criminals turned out to be 44-year-old Denis Gerasimov and 24-year-old Vadim Belyakov Gerasimov had developed an unhealthy interest in children a long time ago. At first, of course, he couldn't do anything with them in real life, but the computer and the internet gave the maniac free rein. He started grooming online. His successes on the internet gave him more confidence, and soon there were victims in real life as well. Closed communities of pedophiles and minors still exist on the internet to this day. In these groups, they post child pornography that they film themselves. It's impossible for an ordinary normal person to enter such a community. To do this, you have to prove that you're one of them by sending a photo or video of the appropriate content. After the tragedy with Veronika Nikolaeva, of course, there were intensified purges on social networks. But these purges are somewhat like fighting a hydra. You cut off one head and 3 new ones immediately grow in its place. The history together of Gerasimov and Belyakov began back in 2012. Vadim was 13 years old. He studied at a special needs school and was under psychiatric supervision. Denis was married at the time and worked as an orderly at that very psychiatric hospital. An illicit relationship developed between them. Vadim was a child at that time, and a child cannot consent to sexual activity. Even if Gerasimov didn't force him and instead won him over with his courtship, attention and care, Vadim was still too young to understand what he was doing or what he was agreeing to. The husband and the sodomites carefully hid their relationship, but in 2015 the couple posted their intimate video in a closed online community. Somehow the police saw the video. Gerasimov was tried without delay, with the full severity of the law. In the end, he was given 4.5 years. While Gerasimov was in prison, Belyakov got caught stealing money from someone else's credit card, which he had stolen from someone. The court wasn't strict with Vadim since he had special needs. He only got a suspended sentence. After being released, Gerasimov reunited with his young lover. He was placed under administrative supervision and consistently reported to the police station on schedule. He brought certificates proving he was employed, and they checked on him at his place of residence where everything seemed fine at first glance. Gerasimov was registered at a completely different address than where he committed his last crime. He was not only forbidden not only to live near places like a children's center, but even to be near them or to approach any gathering of children. The live-in partners rented a room in the dormitory on Volzhskaya, 16 specifically to commit the crime. They rented it intentionally with a verbal agreement, without any signatures, and no one in the dormitory ever saw their documents. The court accused the police officers who failed to watch over the criminal of negligence and filed charges against them. By the way, clinical psychologists believe that the law currently provides insufficiently strict supervision over this type of criminal. They note that in prisons, such people are not medicated well enough to at least temporarily suppress their disorder. Of course, it's impossible to completely cure a person with an unhealthy attraction to children, specialists say. While under supervision after his release, Gerasimov continued to target children on social media. Moreover, it became known that from 2021 to 2022, Gerasimov forced another acquaintance, who was under 18, into sexual acts. On the day of Veronika's abduction, Gerasimov's 45th birthday was approaching. Biryukov wanted to give his beloved a special living gift. They planned to kidnap a boy about 12 years old for their, as they called it, entertainment. They had been looking for a victim for 10 days, roaming wherever children gathered. And then they spotted Veronika, who had gone out to get some fresh air and look at the holiday tree. The maniacs instantly decided to kidnap her. The girl wasn't even left unattended. Her mom went out after her literally a minute later, but that was enough time for the kidnapping. The girl's family was stable. Both parents worked and took good care of their children. But still, it happened. By late evening on January 4th, when the people of Kostroma learned from the media and by word of mouth what had happened to Veronika, crowds of angry townspeople came to the dormitory. People demanded the maniacs be handed over immediately. people demanded that the death penalty be reinstated in the country. The police held back the angry crowd from the suspects and quickly searched for separate cells for them in Butyrka pre-trial detention center. After all, it was clear, in the general cells, neither of them would survive until the trial. Later, when they were transported to Moscow for examinations, they were also given separate compartments so that they would stay alive and later face punishment. During the interrogations, the accomplices blamed each other. Belyakov even tried to pretend to be insane. He apparently hoped that he wouldn't be imprisoned at all, but would be sent to a hospital, since he was on the psychiatric registry. For example, he said that he didn't consider his actions a crime, it's just that he and Gerasimov were diversifying their intimate life this way. He also claimed that he didn't understand where he was. Whether he was aware of his actions is unknown, but both of them were found sane and convicted. At the trial, the prosecutors supported the accusers. At the very beginning of the closing arguments, when the details of the crime started to be announced, Veronica's mother, who was recognized as the victim, ran out of the courtroom. She couldn't bear to listen to it. Both maniacs, Belyakov and Gerasimov, received life sentences and to this day are in the Black Dolphin Penal Colony. Both were provided with state-appointed lawyers. They didn't have their own defense attorneys. Belyakov's parents, after learning about what happened, tried to defend their son. They said that his friend set him up, meaning Gerasimov.
They blamed the friend. Maybe he set him up.
But even his parents weren't sure that their son wasn't capable of something like that, so they didn't rush to hire him a lawyer. His father said, "I don't know if he did it or not, but if he did something, let him serve his time."
Are you going to hire a lawyer? And what's the point of hiring one now? It's expensive, but you say he might not be guilty. Let's hope so.
Gerasimov's relatives completely abandoned him. His mother didn't answer his letters. In prison, Gerasimov writes poems about his mother. The lines are filled with childishness and selfishness. In Black Dolphin, when either of these two is being led through the corridors for a walk or to the doctor, the guards have to watch them very carefully. Even among those who have committed especially serious crimes themselves, they provoke a desire for revenge. The criminals themselves, especially Belyakov, are constantly trying to get privileges and handouts for themselves. Belyakov writes endless petitions, appeals and complaints about his conditions in prison. Gerasimov complains that he has nothing in prison. No one brings him anything or gives him anything, not even matches or the usual everyday items he was used to on the outside. The murderers were ordered to pay several million in compensation to the victim's family. Formally, they apologized to the girl's relatives. In the footage, there are interviews with Belyakov and Gerasimov, and I'll leave additional materials on Telegram. It's scary, so go check it out. Not a trace of remorse, not a drop of regret. It seems they're just annoyed that they got caught. The maniacs talk about their usual routines in a matter-of-fact way, complain a bit drearily about how bad it is in prison, and speak completely calmly about their crime. Looking at them, it seems as if nothing happened and everything is fine. After what happened, a spontaneous memorial arose at the scene of the tragedy. People brought flowers and toys in memory of Veronica. Officials and philanthropists of Kostroma decided to provide the family of the deceased girl with a good 2-room apartment. But of course, no amount of money can ease such pain. Someone is constantly bothering the girl's parents. Some people who want to help are indignant that Veronica's mother doesn't speak politely enough to them. Society blames the girl's mother, passers-by, neighbors, authorities, and the police for what happened. Many people tried to profit from the tragedy. They created online pages for fundraising, pretending to be members of Veronica's family, while the official fundraising was only conducted through the Veronika Nikolaeva Foundation, established by the family's lawyer. The parents themselves were too devastated to think about money. The residents of building number 16 on Volzhskaya Street are still being threatened by strangers for not recognizing the maniacs, for not noticing the nightmare happening next door. The residents of Kostroma created a petition asking to punish the witnesses of the girl's abduction who didn't pay attention and just walked by. The petition has already gathered more than 70 signatures. People are demanding new criminal cases and, as they see it, justice. In reality, the only one to blame for the violence is the perpetrator himself. And what do you think about this? Write in the comments, hit the notification bell and like the video. It helps with promotion and motivates me to make new videos. All the links will be below the video. Leave likes, dislikes, watch other videos on the channel, and check out Boosty and Patreon. There you can watch the scariest video for free. It's so scary, it's even frightening to upload it to YouTube. All the links will be below the video. Leave likes and dislikes, watch other videos on the channel, and check out Boosty and Patreon. There you can watch the scariest videos for free, the ones that are even too scary to upload to YouTube.